The sky above the alien world burned in strange colors, shades of green and violet mixing like a storm painted by unknown hands. Captain Daniel adjusted the straps of his suit as his small ship touched down on the cracked surface of the planet. It was supposed to be a quick supply mission, just another stop in his long routine across the stars. But something about this place felt wrong from the moment he stepped outside. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant howl of alien winds. Ruins stretched before him, broken towers, shattered statues, and long streets covered in glowing moss. Daniel checked his scanner, but there was nothing, no sign of life, no reason for the strange pull he felt in his chest. Then he heard it, a sound, faint at first, like a whisper carried by the wind. It was not the roar of a beast or the groan of broken machines. It was crying, high-pitched, desperate, and filled with fear. Daniel froze, his instincts sharp. Out here, cries could mean danger, a trap, or worse. But the sound grew clearer, two voices crying together. He tightened his grip on his blaster and followed, moving deeper into the ruins. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner a threat, and yet the cries pulled him forward. At the heart of the ruins he found them. Two small figures huddled against a wall, their silver-white skin glowing faintly under the alien sky. Their eyes, large and bright like twin stars, widened in terror when they saw him. They were not human, not by any measure, but they were children, frightened, fragile, and trembling. Daniel lowered his weapon slowly, raising his free hand to show he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice steady. "I'm not here to hurt you." The twins looked at each other, whispering in a language he didn't understand. Their fear was real, but so was their desperation. They clung to each other, as if they had no one else in the universe. Before Daniel could take another step, the ground shook. From the shadows emerged tall hunters in black armor, their glowing weapons humming with deadly energy. Their helmets reflected the eerie sky, hiding their faces but not their intent. Daniel's heart raced. He understood now. The twins were prey, and he had walked straight into the hunt. One of the armored hunters barked a command in a guttural alien tongue, pointing at the twins. The children cried out, clutching each other tighter. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to stay out of it. This was not his war, not his problem. But as he saw the twins' terrified eyes staring at him, silently begging for help, something inside him shifted. He remembered being a child himself, helpless during the colony raids, hiding while his family was dragged away. No one had come to save him then. But he was not that scared child anymore. He was a soldier, a captain, a protector, and he would not stand by while history repeated itself. With one swift motion, Daniel drew his blaster and fired. The first shot struck the nearest hunter in the chest, dropping him with a crash of metal. The others roared in fury, charging forward, their weapons lighting up the ruins. Daniel dove behind a fallen column, returning fire with precision. The ruins echoed with the sounds of battle. Energy bolts exploding against stone, sparks flying in the air. The twins screamed, but did not run, their trust fixed on the strange human who had chosen to fight for them. Daniel moved fast, his training guiding his every step. He rolled, ducked, and fired, each shot buying the children another moment of life. But the hunters were strong, relentless. One bolt grazed his arm, burning through his sleeve. The pain seared him, but he pushed on. At last, when the dust settled, 3 hunters lay motionless on the ground, their armor sparking in the silence. Daniel stood over them, his chest heaving, his arm bleeding. The ruins fell quiet again. Only the sound of the alien wind and the twins' trembling breaths remained. Slowly, Daniel turned toward them, lowering his weapon once more. The twins looked up at him with wide, shining eyes. One of them whispered something, voice soft and filled with awe. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning: gratitude, trust, and something more, something deeper. They had chosen him, even if he did not yet know why. Daniel exhaled, holstering his weapon. This mission was no longer just about supplies or duty. Fate had placed him here for a reason. He didn't know what dangers lay ahead, but he knew one thing. He would protect them, no matter what. The ruins were silent after the battle, but Daniel knew silence never lasted long on a hostile world. He wiped the blood from his arm and tightened the band around his wound. His blaster felt heavier than before, but his eyes kept going back to the twins. They were staring at him, not with fear anymore, but with something like wonder. The children looked almost human at first glance, yet everything about them whispered of a different world. Their silver-white skin glowed faintly, like moonlight given flesh. Their hair shimmered with colors that shifted when they moved, from soft blue to pale gold. And their eyes, deep, star-like pools, held both innocence and ancient sorrow. Daniel approached slowly, crouching so he wouldn't tower over them. "Are you hurt?" he asked, pointing at their arms, their faces, trying to make his words clear. They shook their heads, still clinging to each other. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then one of the twins pressed a hand to her chest and whispered, "Lyra." The other, a heartbeat later, said, "Kale." Names, Daniel realized. He repeated them softly, pointing back at each child in turn, "Lyra, Kale." Then he touched his own chest, "Daniel." The twins exchanged a quick glance, whispering in their strange tongue, and for the first time, their lips curved into small smiles. It was fragile, but it was trust. Before Daniel could say more, Lyra reached out with trembling fingers and touched his forehead. His breath caught, and suddenly his mind was filled with flashes, images not his own, a palace of crystal and light, crowds cheering as two royal children were lifted high, then fire, betrayal, armored soldiers storming the halls, and finally running, endless running, until the ruins became their prison. Daniel staggered back, his heart pounding. He had seen it, felt it. The memories were real. The twins were not just orphans hiding in the dark. They were heirs to a fallen throne, the last of their people. And the hunters he fought were not simple raiders. They were executioners sent to erase a bloodline. Kale spoke then, his voice trembling, broken by fear but steady with meaning. "You protect her." The word was heavy in his accent, but Daniel understood. They had chosen him not by chance, but because no one else remained. Daniel exhaled slowly, looking up at the shattered towers above. He had been a soldier long enough to recognize a hopeless fight when he saw one. Protecting them meant becoming the enemy of whoever had destroyed their world. It meant war, death, and exile. But when he looked at their faces, saw the silent plea in their eyes, he knew the decision had already been made. "All right," he said quietly, his voice firm despite the weight pressing on him. "I'll get you out of here." The twins didn't understand the words, but they understood the tone. Lyra smiled weakly. Kale nodded once, and they stood, still holding each other's hands. They were young, fragile, but there was something unbreakable in them. A spark that told Daniel they carried more than just blood. They carried destiny. The journey out of the ruins was slow and dangerous. Every shadow felt like it was watching them. Every echo made Daniel's finger tighten on the trigger of his blaster. Twice, he spotted patrols of armored hunters searching the ruins, their weapons glowing as they scanned for life. Twice, he pulled the twins into the cover of broken walls, pressing a finger to his lips to silence them. Each time, Lyra and Kale obeyed, their small bodies trembling against him. At nightfall, they found shelter in what had once been a temple, its roof half collapsed but walls still standing. A massive stone statue of an alien queen lay broken across the floor, her face shattered but her crown still glowing faintly. Daniel set up a small fire with his survival kit, the flickering light casting long shadows across the ruins. The twins sat close to the warmth, watching him with wide eyes. He handed them ration packs from his ship, and though they didn't know what to do at first, hunger won over hesitation. They ate in silence, their faces softening with relief. For the first time since landing, Daniel allowed himself to breathe. He looked at the twins and wondered why me. He was no hero, no chosen savior. He was just a man doing his job. Yet somehow, fate had placed him here, between two children and the darkness that wanted to claim them. Later that night, Lyra's voice broke the silence, soft but clear. "Daniel, home?" she asked, pointing at the stars. The word struck him. Home. He thought of Earth, of his small apartment in the orbital colonies, of the life he had left behind to wander the stars. It felt far away now, almost like a dream. He looked back at Lyra, then at Cale, and shook his head. "No," he said softly, "not anymore." The twins leaned closer, curling beside the warmth of the fire, their eyes finally closing in exhausted sleep. Daniel sat awake, blaster resting in his lap, staring out into the alien night. Above them, the sky shimmered with strange constellations, and in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning. The hunters would not stop. The empire that sent them would not forgive. And the secret the twins carried would change everything. He clenched his jaw, whispering to himself, "I'll protect them whatever it takes." The fire flickered low, the twins dreamed beside him, and Daniel, for the first time in years, felt a purpose greater than himself. The alien dawn broke with a sky painted in shifting gold and violet. Daniel woke before the twins, the fire reduced to faint ashes, his body aching but his mind alert. He checked his blaster and scanned the horizon. There was no sign of movement, but he knew better than to trust silence. The hunters would return, and they would come in greater numbers. Lyra stirred first, her luminous eyes blinking against the light. Cale followed, stretching his small arms before clutching his sister's hand again. Daniel noticed how they never let go of each other, not even in sleep. The bond between them was more than comfort. It was survival. He stood and motioned for them to follow, pointing toward the distant ridges beyond the ruins. "My ship is there," he said, even though they might not fully understand. Lyra tilted her head, listening closely, repeating softly, "Ship." It wasn't much, but it meant she was learning. The path out of the ruins was treacherous, broken stone and fallen towers forcing them to move slowly. Several times, Daniel had to carry one twin over a gap or lift rubble blocking the way. Despite the weight of his injuries and exhaustion, he pressed on. He wasn't just walking with refugees. He was escorting royalty, though the crown they carried was invisible. As the sun rose higher, the ruins gave way to wide plains of glowing grass. The blades shimmered with colors that shifted when touched, bending away from their steps as though alive. The twins gasped softly, whispering in awe. To Daniel, the beauty was shadowed by danger. Open fields meant no cover, no place to hide. Still, he pushed forward, scanning every ridge, every shadow, his hand never leaving his blaster. Around midday, they stopped at a shallow stream cutting through the land. The water sparkled like liquid crystal, pure and strange. The twins knelt beside it, dipping their hands in, their faces softening as they drank. Daniel crouched nearby, filling his canteen but never letting his guard down. That was when he saw it, footprints pressed deep into the soft earth. Too large to be human, too fresh to be ignored. The hunters were close. He motioned quickly. "We have to move." The twins obeyed, their small legs moving as fast as they could, but Daniel could hear it now. The faint hum of energy weapons, the distant rumble of armored boots. They were being tracked. Panic stirred in his chest, but he forced it down, channeling it into focus. The land grew harsher as they reached the ridges, jagged rocks and narrow passes offering cover at last. Here, the twins revealed more of their hidden strength. When Daniel stumbled, Cale touched the wound on his arm, and warmth spread through his skin. The pain dulled, the bleeding slowed. Daniel stared in shock, realizing the child had healed him, at least enough to keep moving. Lyra, too, showed strange gifts. When hunters drew near, she would stiffen suddenly, her eyes glowing faintly. Moments later, Daniel would spot patrols ahead, giving them time to hide. It was as if she could sense danger before it arrived. These powers explained why the twins were hunted. Not just heirs of a fallen throne, but children carrying something far more valuable. The legacy of a people who had once commanded both power and mystery. By nightfall, they reached a cavern hidden in the cliffs, its entrance draped with vines that glowed faintly in the dark. Daniel led them inside, the twins close at his side. The cave was cool, filled with the faint hum of crystals embedded in the walls. It wasn't much, but it would keep them hidden until morning. The twins sat near the glowing crystals, their silver skin shimmering in the light. Daniel leaned against the stone wall, exhaustion washing over him. His mind kept circling the same question. Why me? He was just a captain on a supply run, not a hero, not a savior. Yet these children looked at him as if he were their only hope. And perhaps he was... Lyra spoke softly then, pointing at his chest. Heart strong, she said in broken words. Daniel blinked, unsure if she meant it as a compliment or prophecy. Cale added protector, his small voice steady. Daniel felt a strange warmth in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Not duty, not command, but connection. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the distant echo of hunters moving across the plains. Daniel tightened his grip on his blaster, his jaw set. The journey had only just begun, and the danger was far from over. But deep inside, he realized something had changed. This was no longer just survival. It was destiny pulling them forward, step by step. As the twins drifted into sleep beside the glowing crystals, Daniel whispered to himself, I'll see this through, no matter where it leads. And though the night outside was filled with danger, inside the cavern there was a fragile peace. A moment of rest before the storm that was surely coming. The cavern walls glowed faintly with the light of hidden crystals, casting soft colors across the sleeping twins. Daniel sat awake, leaning against the cold stone, his blaster resting across his lap. He had slept in worse places, but tonight he couldn't close his eyes. The weight of responsibility pressed heavy on him, heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. When dawn came, he guided Lyra and Cale out of the cavern, their steps small but determined. The plains stretched endlessly before them, but in the distance, mountains rose like jagged teeth against the horizon. Daniel pointed toward them, shelter, food, maybe answers, he muttered, mostly to himself. The twins simply nodded, trusting his every decision. The journey grew harder as the day wore on. The sun of this alien world was harsher than Earth's, burning through the thin atmosphere. Daniel's throat grew dry, and sweat clung to his skin under the suit. Yet when he glanced at the twins, they endured in silence, their small hands still locked together. They did not complain, not once. That quiet strength made him respect them more than words ever could. At midday, they found the remains of an ancient bridge, its surface cracked and unstable, stretching across a deep ravine. Daniel hesitated, testing the stone with his boot. We'll move slow, he said firmly, though the twins likely understood little. Lyra clutched Cale's hand tighter as they stepped onto the bridge. Halfway across, the sound of engines filled the air, small hunter scouts sweeping low across the skies. Daniel cursed under his breath, pulling the twins down to their knees, shielding them with his body. The machines passed overhead, their searchlights cutting across the ruins. Daniel's heart pounded until they vanished into the clouds. When they finally reached the other side, Lyra's small voice broke the silence. You protect, she said softly. Daniel looked at her, surprised. Her words were broken, but her meaning was clear. She had no doubt in him, no fear, only faith. It struck deeper than any wound he had taken in battle. By evening, they found a small grove of alien trees, their roots glowing faintly under the soil. Daniel set up a fire while the twins rested against each other, their silver skin shimmering in the dim light. When the food was ready, he shared what little rations he had left. Lyra studied him as he ate nothing himself, passing both portions to them. She tilted her head, her glowing eyes filled with something he couldn't name. "Why, give?" she asked in her fractured voice. Daniel smiled faintly, leaning back against a tree. "Because you need it more," he said, though he knew she might not catch every word. Kale repeated it quietly, practicing, "Need more." Lyra touched her chest, then pointed at Daniel, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "Heart strong," she whispered again. For a long moment, Daniel couldn't speak. No one had said words like that to him in years. As night fell, the twins curled closer to him, their heads resting against his shoulders. Daniel froze at first, unaccustomed to such closeness. But then he let out a slow breath, letting them stay. He stared into the fire, feeling something stir inside him. It wasn't just duty anymore, not just survival. It was connection, fragile but real, and it scared him more than the hunters ever could. Later that night, Lyra stirred from sleep, her eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. She whispered something in her language, the words flowing like music. Daniel didn't understand, but the tone was soft, almost tender. When he asked what it meant, she hesitated, then struggled with the translation. "Safe with you," she finally said. The simple words hit harder than any oath. Daniel swallowed, nodding once. "You're safe," he answered, voice low but steady. For the first time in years, he realized he meant it with all his heart. But peace never lasted. In the distance, the sky flared with faint lights. Hunter ships scanning the lands, their engines rumbling through the night. Daniel's chest tightened. The storm was coming closer. And this time, he knew he couldn't just fight with weapons. He would need his heart, his choices, his humanity, because the twins didn't just see him as a soldier anymore. They saw him as something greater. The night passed in restless silence. Daniel barely slept, his ears sharp to every whisper of the alien wind. By morning, the hunter ships had moved closer, their trails burning lines of fire across the sky. It was only a matter of time before they closed in. Daniel pushed the twins forward, guiding them toward the jagged cliffs beyond the grove. If they could reach the caves hidden in the mountains, they might survive another day. But he could feel in his bones, this chase would not end with running. Sooner or later, they would have to stand and fight. The ground trembled before he heard them. Armored hunters marching in formation, their heavy boots breaking the soil. Daniel cursed under his breath, pulling Lyra and Kale behind a boulder. He peeked out and saw at least a dozen of them, weapons glowing with deadly light. The hunters moved with purpose. They knew exactly where their prey was. Daniel checked his blaster, his last energy cell loaded inside. Not enough for a battle of this size. But he had no choice. He turned to the twins, his voice low and steady. "Stay behind me, no matter what happens." The twins stared at him, fear flashing in their luminous eyes. Kale clutched his arm, whispering, "Protector." Daniel forced a smile, though his heart pounded like a drum. "That's right," he said. "Protector." The first hunters appeared at the ridge, their helmets gleaming under the pale light. They raised their weapons, shouting commands in their guttural tongue. Daniel rose from cover and fired the first shot. A bolt of blue energy slammed into the lead hunter's chest, dropping him instantly. The rest roared in anger, unleashing a storm of fire. Daniel dove behind the boulder as the ground exploded around him, shards of stone cutting his skin. He returned fire, each shot precise, taking down two more. But there were too many. Energy bolts seared past him, one striking his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Pain flared white-hot, but he grit his teeth and dragged himself back to his feet. The twins cried out, their small hands reaching for him. "Daniel!" Lyra's voice cracked with fear, but he raised a hand, motioning for them to stay back. His vision blurred, his chest heaved, yet he stood firm. He wasn't fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for them. The hunters pressed forward, circling the boulder, their weapons aimed for the kill. Daniel braced himself for the end. And then it happened. Lyra stepped out from behind the rock, her eyes blazing with light. The air around her shimmered, a wave of energy pulsing from her small frame. The hunters staggered, their weapons crackling, systems shorting out. Kale joined her, his hands glowing with a soft golden light. Where Daniel bled, the wound began to close, the pain fading into warmth. Daniel stared in disbelief as the twins revealed their true power. Lyra lifted her hands. An invisible force struck the hunters, throwing them back like leaves in a storm. Kale's voice rang out, strange words in their alien tongue. The ground beneath the hunters cracked, roots of glowing energy wrapping around their legs, pinning them in place. For the first time, fear flickered in the hunters' glowing visors. They fired wildly, bolts of energy slashing the air. Daniel used the distraction, firing his last shots, dropping the stunned soldiers one by one. Together, man and children turned the battlefield into chaos. When the dust finally cleared, the ridge was littered with broken armor and silent weapons. Smoke curled into the sky, and the only sound was Daniel's ragged breathing. He lowered his blaster, staring at the twins in shock. Their silver skin glowed brighter than ever, their eyes filled with both power and sorrow. Lyra's light dimmed, and she stumbled, falling to her knees. Daniel rushed forward, catching her before she hit the ground. Kale collapsed beside her, drained from the effort, his small body trembling. Daniel held them both close, his voice rough. "You saved me," he whispered, disbelief in every word. Lyra lifted her gaze to him, her voice faint but steady. "No," she said softly. "We save each other." Daniel felt his chest tighten, a mix of pride and fear flooding him. These were not ordinary children. There was something far greater, and the galaxy would never stop hunting them. But in that moment, holding them close as the smoke of battle faded, Daniel made a silent vow. No empire, no army, no power in the stars would take them from him. He would protect them until his last breath, even if it meant standing against the entire universe. The battlefield was quiet at last, but Daniel knew it was only temporary. The hunters would send more, stronger than before. He leaned against the shattered stone, holding Lyra and Kale close as they recovered their strength. Their small frames trembled, their glowing eyes heavy with exhaustion. Yet there was no fear in them anymore, only certainty. Night fell before they dared to move again. They built a small fire deep inside a narrow canyon, hidden from the skies above. Daniel cleaned his blaster, though it had little power left. His hands were steady, but his mind was heavy with questions. What were these children really? How far would their enemies go to erase them? And why had fate chosen him to stand in their path? Lyra stirred, her voice breaking the silence. "Daniel," she whispered, struggling with words not her own. He looked up, meeting her glowing eyes. "Why protect?" she asked softly. Daniel hesitated, caught off guard by the question. He had asked himself the same thing many times. Why risk his life for two children who weren't even human? He could have walked away that first night, let fate take its course. But when he opened his mouth, the answer came without doubt. "Because no one protected me when I was your age," he said quietly, his voice rough. "I know what it feels like to be left alone, hunted, afraid. I won't let that happen to you." The twins exchanged a glance, silent words passing between them. Then Kale leaned forward, touching Daniel's wounded arm. "Heart same," he whispered. Lyra nodded, her expression calm, almost solemn. "Not protector, more—" Daniel frowned, unsure what she meant. But before he could ask, Lyra reached for his hand, placing it gently between her own and Kale's. Her touch was warm, her silver skin glowing faintly in the firelight. Daniel felt a strange pulse, like energy flowing between them. Images filled his mind again, visions of crystal halls, voices chanting in harmony, a ceremony of light. And in the center, a union between their kind and another, binding not just lives, but destinies. He pulled his hand back, shaken. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. Lyra blinked, then struggled to find the right words. Our people broken, she said slowly. Bloodline ending, Kale added, his small voice steady despite his age. Lyra's eyes glowed brighter, filled with something far older than her years. Future needs human. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The meaning sank in like a heavy stone. They weren't just asking for protection anymore. They were choosing him, not as a guardian, not as a soldier, but as something far deeper. His chest tightened, emotions colliding inside him. It was absurd. He was human. They were alien children of fallen empire. And yet, the way they looked at him carried no doubt, no hesitation. To them, he wasn't just a protector. He was the bridge, the answer to their survival. No, Daniel whispered, shaking his head. You don't understand what you're asking. He stood, pacing near the fire. I'm not your savior. I'm not. He stopped, his voice breaking. I'm not the man you think I am. But the twins did not flinch. Lyra rose slowly, walking toward him with quiet grace. She placed her small hand on his chest, right over his heart. Her voice was steady, filled with certainty beyond her years. You are, she said simply. Daniel closed his eyes, fighting the storm inside him. Part of him wanted to run, to escape the weight of their choice. But another part, the part that had carried him through every battle, every loss, knew the truth. He had been chosen, not by fate, not by prophecy, but by trust. Their trust. The fire crackled softly between them. Daniel opened his eyes and saw the twins watching him, their faces calm, their hands joined. They weren't asking for permission. They were declaring their decision. In the distance, the sky rumbled with the sound of hunter ships approaching again. Daniel clenched his fists, torn between fear and acceptance. The universe was closing in on them, ready to crush what little hope remained. But in that canyon, by the faint glow of the fire, two children had made their choice. And it was him. The canyon trembled as the rumble of hunter ships grew louder. Daniel stood at the fire's edge, his heart torn between fear and the weight of the twins' choice. Lyra and Kale stood together, their hands joined, their glowing eyes fixed on him. They had already decided. He was no longer just their protector. He was their future. Daniel wanted to argue, to refuse, to push them away before destiny swallowed them all. But when he looked at them, he couldn't. He saw courage in Kale's steady gaze, hope in Lyra's faint smile. They weren't asking him to be something he wasn't. They were asking him to be exactly what he had already become. The roar of engines drew closer, dust falling from the canyon walls. Daniel tightened his grip on his blaster, but his weapon was almost useless now. The twins stepped forward, placing their hands on his arms. A wave of warmth surged through him, flowing into his chest. For a moment, the pain of his wounds faded, the exhaustion lifted. He felt stronger, as if their bond gave him a power no weapon could match. Lyra's voice was soft but clear. Together. Kale echoed her, not alone. Daniel nodded slowly, his jaw set. Not alone, he repeated. The hunters descended into the canyon, armored figures moving in formation, their weapons raised. But this time, Daniel didn't feel fear. He stood tall, the twins at his side, a strange light glowing faintly where their hands touched his skin. When the first shot rang out, Daniel raised his blaster and returned fire. But now, he wasn't fighting alone. Lyra lifted her hand, a wave of invisible force shattering the enemy's aim. Kale's voice rang out in their alien tongue, roots of glowing energy breaking through the stone to ensnare the hunter's legs. Daniel moved between them, his shots precise, his steps guided by instinct and strength that no longer felt like his own. It wasn't man protecting children anymore. It was three souls fighting as one. The battle raged, light and fire filling the canyon. The hunters fell one by one, overwhelmed not just by power, but by unity. When the last soldier collapsed, silence fell again, broken only by Daniel's heavy breaths. He lowered his weapon, looking at the twins. They smiled faintly, though their small bodies trembled from the effort. Daniel knelt, pulling them into his arms. "You did it," he whispered, his voice rough with pride. Lyra shook her head softly, resting against his chest. "No, we did." The dawn came slowly, light spilling over the canyon walls. For the first time since landing, Daniel felt something new, not just survival, not just duty, but possibility. As they climbed out of the canyon together, the twins spoke in their broken words, explaining piece by piece what their choice truly meant. Their people's survival was tied to union, to bonds that crossed blood and species. And they had chosen him, not out of desperation, but out of trust, loyalty, and something even deeper. Daniel struggled with the weight of it, but he couldn't deny the truth. From a moment he had stood against the hunters, their lives had intertwined. When they reached the mountain ridge, the view stretched wide before them. The ruins of a fallen empire behind, the endless stars ahead. Daniel placed a hand on each of their shoulders. His voice was steady, filled with quiet resolve. "Then we start over, together." The twins' eyes shone like twin stars, their small hands gripping his tightly. And in that simple gesture, Daniel understood. This was no accident, no burden. This was his new beginning. As the three of them walked toward the rising sun, Daniel glanced back once at the battlefield below. A silent vow burned in his chest. He had once been a man drifting between stars, searching for meaning. Now, he had found it in the most unlikely place, in two alien children who had chosen him, not just as protector, but as family. He smiled faintly, whispering to himself, "They gave me a reason to live." And with every step forward, the galaxy felt less like a battlefield, and more like a home waiting to be built, not by one race, not by one people, but by hearts bound across the stars.